Why don't you empty your apron pockets for everybody nice and slow?" The sentence sliced through the diner so sharply that even the silverware seemed to stop moving. Naomi Brooks froze beside table 7, one hand still wrapped around a half-filled coffee pot, the other trembling just enough to make the spoon on the customer's plate rattle softly. Outside, rain streaked down the windows of Rose's diner in long silver lines, blurring the red neon open sign into a bleeding glow against the dark Ohio highway. Inside, nobody spoke. Nobody chewed. Nobody looked comfortable anymore. Officer Daniel Reeves stood near the register with one hand resting casually on his belt, his broad shoulders blocking the narrow aisle between the booths. Beside him, Officer Kyle Mercer scanned the diner slowly, almost lazily, like he already knew how the night would end. Naomi swallowed hard. "Sir, I already told you," she said quietly, her voice careful, respectful, exhausted from the double shift stretching into its 11th hour. "I didn't take anybody's wallet." Reeves tilted his head slightly, the way some men do when they've already decided they don't believe a word coming out of your mouth. "Funny thing is," he replied, loud enough for every customer to hear, "the wallet disappears right after you clear the table." The old ceiling fan hummed overhead. Somewhere near the kitchen pass-through window, grease crackled softly on the grill. Naomi could feel every pair of eyes in the diner touching her skin at once. The trucker in the back booth stopped eating his fries. A teenage couple near the jukebox exchanged nervous glances. Martha Green, the 68-year-old owner of the diner, stood frozen beside the pie display with a dish towel clutched tightly in both hands. Naomi hated this feeling. Not the accusation itself. She'd dealt with rude customers before. Drunk customers too. But this feeling of becoming a spectacle, of suddenly turning into a warning sign for everybody else in the room, always settled deep in her chest like cold cement. "Officer," Martha finally said carefully, "Naomi's worked here almost 3 years. She's a good girl." Reeves didn't even look at her. Then she should have no problem cooperating. Naomi slowly placed the coffee pot down onto the counter before her shaking hand spilled it completely. Her reflection flickered faintly in the chrome napkin dispenser nearby. Brown eyes. Tired face. Curly hair pulled back beneath a faded burgundy visor with roses stitched across the front. 26 years old and running on maybe 4 hours of sleep. Earlier that morning she'd been sitting beside her mother's hospital bed listening to another doctor explain another medication they probably couldn't afford by next month. Now she stood under buzzing fluorescent lights while strangers silently judged whether she looked like someone capable of stealing. "Empty your pockets," Mercer added this time, his tone smoother but colder somehow. "Let's save everybody time." Naomi slowly nodded once. She reached into the front pocket of her apron and removed a receipt pad, 2 pens, a packet of sugar, and $37 in folded bills from tips she hadn't even counted yet. Reeves watched her hands closely. "That all?" Naomi opened her mouth to answer when a ceramic mug clinked softly somewhere behind the officers. The sound was tiny. Almost nothing. But in the silence of the diner, it pulled attention like a thread. 2 men sat quietly in the corner booth near the fogged-up front windows. Both black. Both broad-shouldered. One wore a grey hooded sweatshirt beneath a weathered denim jacket. The other had on a dark green flannel rolled neatly at the sleeves. Their meal sat mostly untouched in front of them. 1 black coffee. 1 plate of eggs gone cold. The taller one lifted his gaze slowly toward the officers, calm and unreadable. Naomi realized then she'd barely noticed them earlier. They had the kind of presence some people carried naturally, not loud, not demanding attention, but impossible to fully ignore once you looked directly at them. The taller man glanced briefly toward Naomi's shaking hands before returning his eyes to Reeves. "You got probable cause?" he asked quietly. The question landed differently than everything else in the room. Not emotional. Not aggressive. Precise. Officer Mercer turned first. "Excuse me." The man leaned back slightly against the booth cushion. "You heard me." Reeves stared at him for a long second. Rain tapped steadily against the glass beside the booth. Red and blue patrol lights flashed outside across the wet pavement, coloring the diner walls in slow pulses. Naomi suddenly noticed something strange about the two men. They were completely still. Not nervous stillness. Controlled stillness. The kind built from discipline instead of fear. The second man folded his hands calmly atop the table. "You're humiliating her in front of an entire diner over a missing wallet nobody's even searched for yet," he said. "Seems backwards." Reeves gave a humorless laugh. "And who exactly are you supposed to be?" The taller man finally lifted his coffee cup, though his eyes never left the officer's. "Customers," he answered. "Just customers trying to finish dinner." The diner stayed silent long enough for the rain to become the loudest thing in the room. Officer Reeves looked down at the wallet again, then toward the wet footprint scattered across the black and white tile floor near the entrance. Water glistened beneath the fluorescent lights in uneven streaks where customers had tracked rain inside all evening. The wallet sat alone on the counter, perfectly dry, the leather untouched by moisture. Mercer stepped forward quickly. "Maybe it was under the booth longer than we thought." The second man in the booth adjusted his glasses calmly. "Interesting theory," he said. "Except your officer just claimed a customer found it after the waitress cleaned the section." Naomi watched the exchange with her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She had spent the last 15 minutes shrinking smaller and smaller inside herself, trying not to cry, trying not to shake, trying not to look angry, because angry never helped women who looked like her in situations like this. But now something else entered the room. Not safety exactly. Just imbalance. For the first time, the officers no longer controlled every inch of the conversation. Reeves straightened his posture. "You two seem awfully invested in this." Marcus Hill remained standing beside the booth, calm enough to make the tension around him feel almost deliberate. "No, sir," he replied quietly. "We are invested in making sure a tired waitress is not publicly accused without evidence." Mercer folded his arms. "You calling us dishonest?" "I am saying details matter." Naomi noticed the older truck driver near the back booth slowly nod once before lowering his coffee cup. The teenage boy near the jukebox leaned closer toward his girlfriend and whispered something she immediately shushed. Even Martha seemed to stand a little straighter behind the register now, though fear still lingered in her tired eyes. Reeves glanced toward Naomi again. "You know these men?" Naomi shook her head quickly. "No, sir." Reeves looked unconvinced. Outside, headlights swept briefly across the diner windows as a semi-truck rolled down the highway beyond the parking lot. The glow passed through the room like a moving shadow before disappearing into the rain again. Mercer stepped toward Marcus. "Then maybe both of you should stop creating tension before somebody gets hurt." Marcus did not react to the warning. "Nobody here wants trouble." "Then sit down." Marcus slowly placed his coffee cup onto the table. Ceramic clicked softly against wood. "With respect, officer, tension started the moment you decided to accuse somebody publicly before reviewing basic evidence." Naomi saw Reeves' jaw tighten again. Men like him were used to immediate obedience. Used to rooms falling quiet because they entered them wearing authority on their belts. But Marcus spoke to him without fear and without disrespect at the same time, which somehow seemed to irritate him even more. The second man finally stood from the booth too. Slightly shorter than Marcus. Broader through the chest. Calm eyes behind reading glasses. "Isaiah Cole," he said quietly when Reeves looked at him. "And before you ask, yes, I am also just a customer." Mercer exhaled sharply through his nose. "This is unbelievable." Isaiah ignored the comment and looked toward Naomi instead. "When was the last time you saw the wallet?" Naomi swallowed. "I never saw it until he put it on the counter." "And the customer who reported it?" Martha answered instead. "Mr. Delaney. The man in the golf jacket." Isaiah nodded once. "Did he appear intoxicated?" Reeves immediately stepped forward again. "That is enough questioning." Isaiah calmly removed his glasses and folded them into his jacket pocket. Funny thing about memory, he said softly. Rainy nights, long drives, alcohol, stress. People lose things all the time. Mercer gave a humorless laugh. You some kind of psychologist now? No, sir. Isaiah glanced briefly around the diner. Just observant. Naomi felt something strange building slowly in the room now. Not confidence exactly. More like people remembering they were allowed to think for themselves. Earlier everyone had stared down at plates and coffee cups pretending none of this involved them. But now eyes were lifting again. Customers exchanged uncertain looks. Questions had entered the room, and once questions appeared, fear started losing some of its grip. Reeves noticed it too. Naomi could tell. His voice sharpened slightly. Here is what is going to happen. We are going to finish our investigation without interference. Marcus nodded once. Then investigate. Reeves stared at him. Excuse me. Check the parking lot. Review the cameras. Speak to the customer again. Investigate. The words landed cleanly. No sarcasm. No anger. Somehow that made them heavier. Mercer looked toward Naomi again, then toward the back office hallway near the kitchen. Where is the camera system? Martha hesitated. Reeves answered for her. Finally. But before either officer could move, the truck driver near the back booth spoke for the first time all night. Wallet guy was pretty drunk. Every head in the diner turned toward him. The old man shrugged slightly beneath his flannel jacket. Saw him patting his pockets twice before he left. Mercer frowned. Why did you not say that earlier? The truck driver looked down into his coffee. Nobody asked. Silence settled again. Different this time. Less fearful. More uncertain. Naomi felt warmth rise unexpectedly behind her eyes. Not because things were fixed. They were not. Her humiliation still hung in the room like smoke. But for the first time that night, somebody besides her had spoken up. Then another person. Then another. Reeves glanced around the diner and realized the room no longer belonged entirely to him. Outside, thunder rolled low across the dark highway while rainwater streamed down the windows in silver ribbons. Marcus slowly stepped aside from the aisle, finally giving the officers room to pass toward the back office. But as Reeves moved past him, Marcus spoke one more time in the same calm voice that never once rose above conversation level. Real authority does not fear being questioned, officer. Reeves stopped for half a second without turning around. Then he continued walking toward the camera room while the entire diner watched in complete silence. For a while, nobody in Rose's diner moved very much. The storm had nearly passed outside, leaving only scattered rain tapping softly against the windows and the distant hiss of tires rolling across wet pavement on the interstate. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead while steam curled slowly from coffee mugs that had gone untouched through most of the night. Naomi sat behind the counter with both hands wrapped around her cup, feeling warmth finally return to her fingers. Her body still carried the leftover tremor of humiliation, but something else had settled beneath it now too. Relief. Quiet and careful relief. Officer Reeves remained near the register holding the recovered wallet loosely at his side. Mercer stood by the front window staring out toward the patrol car like he wished he were already gone. Martha wiped the counter beside the pie display even though it no longer needed wiping. Old habits. Nervous hands needing purpose. Marcus and Isaiah sat quietly in their booth again, looking more like tired travelers than the men who had just shifted the entire room without once raising their voices. Then the truck driver near the back booth slowly stood up. His heavy boots scraped gently against the floor as he reached for his faded baseball cap. He looked toward Marcus for a long second before speaking. You boys served overseas. Marcus glanced up calmly. Yes, sir. The old man nodded once. Army myself. Desert Storm. Isaiah gave a respectful nod back. Thank you for your service. The truck driver studied both men more carefully now. "You two remind me of somebody." Marcus smiled faintly. "Probably not." But the old man kept staring. Then suddenly his expression changed. Not fear. Recognition. "Wait a second." He stepped closer toward the booth, squinting beneath the diner lights. "Kandahar. 2011. Isaiah looked up slowly. Marcus remained still. The old man pointed gently toward Marcus' face. "You pulled 3 National Guard boys out of that convoy collapse near Route Redbird." Silence swept across the diner instantly. Mercer turned from the window. Reeves looked over sharply. Even Naomi straightened slightly behind the counter. Marcus exhaled quietly through his nose like somebody remembering something heavy. "Long time ago." The truck driver shook his head slowly in disbelief. "My nephew was there." His voice roughened slightly. "Said his unit would not have made it home without 2 Navy guys who stayed behind after everybody else pulled out." Marcus lowered his eyes briefly toward the untouched coffee in front of him. "Your nephew made it home. That is what matters." But the old man was already emotional now. "He still talks about you." Mercer frowned slightly. "You never mentioned any of this." Isaiah gave a tired half smile. "Nobody asked." The room changed again after that. Naomi could feel it more than see it. Earlier the officers had looked at Marcus and Isaiah like interruptions. Then like problems. Then like annoyingly observant strangers. But now something deeper entered the room. Perspective. Reeves stared at the 2 men carefully, suddenly aware that the calm he mistook for defiance earlier had actually been discipline shaped over years most people in the diner could barely imagine. The truck driver reached into his wallet with rough hands and pulled out an old folded photograph worn soft at the edges. "That is him," he said quietly, sliding it across the table. A young soldier grinned beside a military transport vehicle beneath desert sunlight. Marcus looked at the picture for a moment and smiled faintly. He had terrible aim. The old man laughed unexpectedly, the sound warm and shaky all at once. "Still does." Even Martha smiled softly behind the counter. The tension inside the diner loosened another inch. Reeves looked toward Marcus again. "You stayed remarkably calm tonight." Marcus leaned back slightly in the booth. "Because panic spreads faster than truth." Mercer crossed his arms uneasily. "Most people would have escalated." Isaiah looked directly at him. "Most people get tired of being treated like threats before anybody knows their names." Silence followed that sentence too. But it was different now. Not defensive. Reflective. Naomi watched Reeves absorb the word slowly while red and blue patrol lights still flickered softly through the windows onto the diner walls. The colors no longer looked intimidating. Just tired. Human. Reeves finally walked toward the booth and placed the recovered wallet down on the table beside Marcus. "I misjudged the situation." Marcus nodded once but said nothing. Reeves looked toward Naomi then. Truly looked at her this time. Not as a suspect. Not as a disturbance. Just a young woman standing at the end of a very long shift. "And I misjudged you." Naomi did not know what to say. Years of experience had taught her that apologies did not erase moments like tonight. They did not erase the fear that settled into your chest when authority looked at you and saw guilt first. But still, hearing the words mattered more than she expected. Martha suddenly pointed toward the coffee pot. "Everybody has been standing around with cold coffee for 30 minutes. The sentence broke the heaviness in the room almost instantly. Even Mercer let out a short breath that nearly resembled a laugh. Naomi stood carefully from the stool behind the register and reached automatically for the fresh pot warming beside the machine. The ordinary motion steadied her somehow. Pour coffee. Refill cups. Continue breathing. Continue living. She moved first toward the truck driver. Then Martha. Then the officers. Finally she reached Marcus and Isaiah's booth. Steam curled upward between them as she filled the mug slowly. Marcus looked up at her. "You okay?" Naomi considered the question honestly. Outside, the storm. Clouds were beginning to thin above the highway. Somewhere beyond the parking lot, the first faint break in the clouds allowed pale moonlight to touch the wet asphalt. Inside the diner, strangers who had entered the night divided by suspicion now sat together in exhausted silence. Naomi looked at the two men who had refused to let her stand alone in humiliation and answered softly, "I think I will be." The diner slowly began breathing like a normal place again. Plates clinked softly. Coffee poured. Somebody fed quarters into the old jukebox near the front windows, and low country music drifted through the room beneath the fading hum of storm winds outside. But the night still lingered in people's faces. You could see it in the way customers glanced toward Naomi with quiet sympathy now instead of uncertainty. You could see it in the way Officer Reeves stood a little less rigid beside the counter, as though the weight of the evening had settled somewhere deeper than procedure manuals and official reports. Naomi moved carefully between booths with the fresh coffee pot balanced in one hand. Her legs still felt tired beneath her, but the shaking had finally stopped. That mattered more than she expected. Earlier she had felt exposed under the diner lights, like every ugly assumption people carried had suddenly been dragged into the open and pinned onto her uniform apron. Now the room felt different. Not perfect, but human again. She reached the officers last. Mercer looked almost uncomfortable when she approached with the coffee pot. "Refill?" Naomi asked quietly. Mercer hesitated before sliding his mug forward without meeting her eyes. "Thank you." The words sounded unfamiliar coming from him, like he had not expected to say them tonight. Naomi filled his cup anyway. Then Reeves held out his mug too. Steam curled upward between them while the neon open sign reflected across the counter in red waves. Reeves cleared his throat softly. He began, then stopped. Naomi waited. Reeves looked down into the dark coffee for a second before continuing. "My daughter is about your age." Naomi blinked slightly, surprised by the sentence. Reeves gave a tired half smile that never fully reached his eyes. "She works nights while finishing nursing school." Martha paused beside the pie display, listening without pretending otherwise. Reeves rubbed one hand slowly against the ceramic mug. "Truth is," he admitted quietly, "if somebody treated her the way we treated you tonight, I would probably lose my mind." Silence settled gently around the counter. Not awkward silence. Honest silence. Naomi studied the officer carefully. The authority was still there. The uniform. The badge. The tired lines near his eyes. But something softer had broken through underneath it now. Regret maybe. Real regret. Mercer stared into his coffee without speaking. Marcus and Isaiah remained in their booth nearby, giving the moment space instead of inserting themselves into it. That restraint stayed with Naomi almost as much as anything else tonight. They had stepped in when needed. Stepped back when truth could stand on its own. Reeves exhaled slowly. "I should have listened sooner." Naomi looked down briefly at the fresh coffee warming her hand. Part of her wanted to say it was fine because women like her learned early how to smooth tension for other people's comfort. But another part of her was simply too tired to pretend tonight had not hurt. It was embarrassing, she admitted softly. Reeves nodded once. "I know." Naomi looked at Mercer then. He shifted uncomfortably beneath her gaze before finally speaking. "We see a lot of bad situations." Naomi answered quietly, "And sometimes you start expecting people like me to be part of them." Mercer's jaw tightened slightly because he knew she was right. Nobody argued. Outside, clouds drifted slowly apart above the interstate. Moonlight reflected across the wet parking lot in long silver streaks while water dripped steadily from the diner awning. The storm had passed. Inside, the truck driver paid his bill and stopped beside Marcus' booth on the way out. He shook both men's hands firmly. "My nephew would want me to thank you again." Marcus smiled faintly. Tell him to stop shooting left-handed." The old man laughed warmly before stepping out into the cool night air. Naomi watched him disappear toward his 18-wheeler beneath the glow of parking lot lamps. Martha suddenly pointed a spoon toward the officers. "You boys hungry?" Mercer looked confused. "What?" "I asked if you are hungry." Martha shrugged. "Whole diner forgot to eat while y'all turned this place into a courtroom." Even Reeves laughed quietly at that. "We should probably get going." But Martha shook her head immediately. "Nope. Kitchen is still open another 20 minutes. Naomi looked toward Marcus and Isaiah instinctively. Isaiah raised one eyebrow slightly. "You trust us to stay?" Naomi surprised herself by smiling. A real smile this time. Small. Tired. But real. "I think the diner survived worse tonight." Marcus glanced toward the menu lying open near the sugar dispenser. "Then maybe we finally finish dinner." Martha clapped her hands once softly. "Now that sounds civilized." Naomi grabbed her order pad automatically while Mercer and Reeves exchanged uncertain looks. "You do not have to," Reeves began. "I know," Naomi interrupted gently. "But everybody deserves one peaceful cup of coffee before the night ends." The sentence settled quietly over the diner. Marcus looked down into his mug for a moment before nodding slightly to himself, as though the words carried more weight than Naomi realized. Mercer finally removed his hat and placed it beside the counter. Reeves loosened his shoulders for the first time all evening. And slowly, beneath fluorescent lights and fading storm clouds, people who had stood divided by fear only an hour earlier began sharing the same small diner like ordinary human beings again. Naomi wrote down their food orders carefully while country music drifted softly from the jukebox and steam rose warm into the midnight air. For the first time that night, nobody in Rose's diner looked ready for a fight anymore.